Jerusalem. A land promised by God himself to Abraham and his descendants, Jacob and Israel. A place where kings like David and Solomon once ruled the world with absolute wisdom. It was supposed to be a sanctuary of peace. So why is it now a theater of war? Why is the blood of Palestinian civilians staining the very soil that is called holy? Why did the United States, defying the rest of the world, take the radical step of declaring Jerusalem the capital of Israel? Is it just politics, or is there a much darker ancient script being followed? Who does this land really belong to, and which nation is truly worthy of its legacy? To find out, we have to look past the headlines and dive into a history filled with betrayal, broken promises, and a struggle for power that started thousands of years ago. This is the untold story of the world's most contested city. This is the history of Jerusalem.
4,000 years ago, under the scorching, relentless sun of the Canaanite desert, a weary traveler sought refuge. His name was Jacob, later known to history as Israel. With no bed and no shelter, he laid his head on a cold, jagged stone to sleep. That night, a vision tore through the fabric of reality. Jacob saw a celestial ladder, its base on the dust of the earth, its top reaching the very gates of the heavens. Angels ascended and descended in a dance of light. In that moment, God spoke. A divine promise was made. This land would belong to Jacob and his lineage forever. Jacob woke in a cold sweat. He anointed that very stone with oil and whispered its new name, Bethel, the house of God.
But history is rarely a straight line of glory. Jacob had 12 sons, the fathers of the 12 tribes, but jealousy is a slow-growing poison. His brothers, blinded by hate for Jacob's favorite son, Joseph, committed an act of unspeakable cruelty. They cast the young Joseph into a lightless, dry well, leaving him to die in the silence of the desert. But the well was not the end. It was the beginning. Through a series of miraculous events, Joseph was rescued and sold into slavery in Egypt. From the depths of a prison cell to the golden halls of power, Joseph's wisdom earned him the highest rank in the land, the vizier of Egypt. When a great famine struck the world, Joseph's brothers came to Egypt, begging for bread. In a moment of divine irony, the family that betrayed him was now at his mercy. Joseph forgave them and brought his entire father's house, the 70 souls of the children of Israel, into the heart of Egypt. And so, the journey of the Israelites began not in freedom, but in the shifting sands of a foreign empire, waiting for a destiny that would take 400 years to unfold. 400 years passed, and the shifting sands of time turned the honored guests of Egypt into slaves. The descendants of Jacob were now broken under the Pharaoh's whip, their cries for mercy echoing against the massive stone pyramids. Then came Moses, the man chosen to defy an empire. We have all heard the legend of the Red Sea, the moment when the ocean was torn apart by divine command. Imagine walls of water standing like colossal guards as the Israelites walked across the dry seabed to freedom. It was the greatest miracle the world had ever seen. But how quickly does a miracle fade from the human heart? As soon as they crossed into the wilderness, their old habits returned. While Moses climbed the heights of Mount Sinai, fasting for 40 days to receive the 10 Commandments, his people were down in the valley, melting their jewelry to build a god made of gold, a golden calf. They had just seen the power of the Creator, and yet they chose a lifeless statue. The ultimate test came at the very gates of their long-lost home. The promised land was within sight. God commanded them to enter and reclaim their legacy. But the Israelites were paralyzed by fear. They looked at their prophet, the man who had walked them through a sea,
and uttered words of cowardice that still stain history. They said, "Go, Moses, you and your Lord, and fight. We are staying right here." The consequence of that arrogance was devastating. For their refusal to trust, God sentenced them to wander the desert for 40 years, a march to nowhere. An entire generation that had seen the miracles of Egypt perished in the dust. They were allowed to see the land, but never to touch it. It was a lesson written in the burning sands. This holy land is not a free gift. It is a sacred duty. And those who fear men more than God are never worthy of its soil.
After 40 years of wandering, the dust finally settled. The desert had claimed the cowards, and a new generation of warriors stepped into the promised land. But their greatest era was yet to come. A shepherd boy who became a king. It was David who finally captured the ancient city of Jerusalem, making it the eternal capital of the Israelites. He was a man of war, but also a man of worship. It was his dream to build a permanent house for God, a sanctuary that would never be moved again. But that honor was reserved for his son, Solomon the Wise. Under Solomon, the kingdom reached the pinnacle of its glory. He was a king like no other. He commanded the winds. He understood the language of birds, and even the unseen jinn labored under his command. Gold became as common as stone in the streets of Jerusalem. In the heart of the city, Solomon fulfilled his father's dream. He built the first temple, a masterpiece of cedar wood, gold, and precious stones. It was the center of the world, the place where the presence of God rested. For the first time in history, the Israelites were not just a nation, they were a superpower. But even at the height of such splendor, the seeds of ruin were being sown. For even a kingdom built on gold and wisdom cannot survive if its people forget the one who gave it all. The golden age was shining, but the shadows of the first great catastrophe were already beginning to grow.
History has a haunting way of repeating itself. After the death of Solomon, the kingdom split in two. The golden crown was cracked. Corruption, idol worship, and internal strife began to rot the very foundation of the nation that God had blessed. The warnings of the prophets went unheeded, and then the sky over Jerusalem turned black with the smoke of an invading empire. From the east came Nebuchadnezzar, the ruthless king of Babylon. In 586 BC, his massive army surrounded the holy city. The siege was brutal. The walls that David had built were breached. The streets of Jerusalem, once flowing with gold and wisdom, were now flowing with blood. Then came the ultimate tragedy. The first temple, the masterpiece of Solomon, the heart of the Israelite faith, was set on fire. Imagine the horror as the gold-leafed walls melted in the heat, and the sanctuary collapsed into a heap of ash and stone. The survivors were not allowed to stay. Bound in chains, the nobility and the commoners alike were dragged away from their homeland. They were forced on a long, bitter march to the city of Babylon. As they sat by the rivers of a foreign land, they wept for the city they had lost. Jerusalem lay in ruins, silent, deserted. The promised land was empty, and the children of Israel were once again slaves in a foreign empire.
For 70 long years, the children of Israel sat by the rivers of Babylon, weeping for a home they thought was lost forever. Their harps were silent, hung upon the willow trees. But history is governed by a higher power. When Cyrus the Great finally broke their chains, it wasn't just a return to a city. It was a second chance for a nation. They marched back across the burning sands, and with trembling hands, they raised the second temple from the dust of the first. But as the walls rose, the spirit fell. During those decades in Babylon, a new shadow had crept into their hearts. Though the law of Moses strictly forbade usury, the cold, heartless practice of profiting from the misery of the poor, it became the new religion of the elites. They didn't just build a temple, they built a financial empire, trading the sacred commandments for the weight of silver and gold. Their rebellion reached its peak not through wealth, but through blood. History records a dark and terrifying pattern, the persecution of the messengers. Prophet after prophet was sent to call them back to the light, but they were met with stones, iron chains, and the blade of the assassin. They became a nation that silenced the very voices sent to save them.
When the Messiah, Jesus, walked the streets of Jerusalem, offering a path of mercy, they saw him as their ultimate enemy. They plotted in the shadows, they conspired with their oppressors, and they demanded his life. They were convinced they had ended him, but God had a final, divine mystery in store. He raised Jesus, Isa, to the heavens, far beyond their reach, where he waits until the final hour of this world to descend once more. The cup of divine patience had finally overflowed. The blood of the prophets cried out from the soil. In the year 70 AD, God unleashed the iron fury of the Roman Empire. General Titus did not just attack a city, he erased a world. Imagine the silence after the roar of the fire. The Second Temple, the sanctuary they had turned into a house of greed, was burned until the very gold melted into the cracks of the stones. The Roman soldiers literally tore the temple apart, stone by stone, to retrieve that gold. The streets were left empty. The promised land was closed. The children of Israel were cast into the great darkness of the world, scattered as refugees across every continent, carrying the weight of a curse that would last for 2,000 years. The era of the temple was dead.
After the Roman destruction, the ruins of Jerusalem lay silent for centuries. But as the iron grip of pagan Rome crumbled, a new power rose from its ashes. Christianity spread like wildfire across Europe and the East. For Christians, this was not just a city, it was the Holy Land, the ground where Jesus had walked, the place of his teachings, and the site of his ultimate sacrifice. Under the Byzantine Empire, Jerusalem became the heart of the Christian world. Magnificent churches, like the Holy Sepulchre, rose where temples once stood. For 600 years, it was a place of pilgrimage, a sanctuary for those who followed the cross. But history was preparing for its most significant shift. From the vast, sun-drenched deserts of Arabia, a new light emerged. In the year 637, the momentum of Islam reached the gates of the Holy City. This was no ordinary conquest. The Byzantine patriarch, Sophronius, looked down from the walls at the discipline of the Muslim army, and he made a decision that would change history. He would only surrender the keys of Jerusalem to one man, Umar ibn Al-Khattab, the second caliph of Islam. The world expected a conqueror in golden armor. Instead, Umar arrived on a single camel, dusty and travel-worn, sharing terms with his servant. He entered the city not as a tyrant, but as a servant of God.
To protect the peace, he signed the Covenant of Umar. He granted the Christians total safety for their lives, their churches, and their faith. He even refused to pray inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, leaving it in Christian hands to ensure their rights were never violated. It was an act of justice, unseen in the ancient world. But when the Caliph reached the Temple Mount, he found a sight that broke his heart. The site of the ancient prophets had been turned into a wasteland of filth and garbage by the previous occupiers. With his own hands, Umar began to clear the debris, making way for the first simple house of prayer. Jerusalem had found a new protector. Under the crescent, the city became a sanctuary where the call to prayer honored the legacy of all the prophets. A new era of peace had dawned. But far across the seas, the drums of the Crusades were already beginning to beat.
The peace of Umar lasted for centuries, but in the year 1099, the horizon turned dark with the armor of the West. The Crusades had begun. Driven by a religious fire from Europe, thousands of knights arrived at the walls of Jerusalem. This was not a conquest of mercy. When the city walls fell, the streets of Jerusalem became a river of blood. History records that the Crusaders spared no one, not the Muslims, not the Jews, not even the local Christians. For 88 years, the cross flew over the Dome of the Rock, and the city mourned in silence. But then, a name rose that would be respected by both friend and foe. Salahuddin Al-Ayyubi, known to the West as Saladin. In the year 1187, at the epic Battle of Hattin, Saladin crushed the Crusader armies. When he reached the gates of Jerusalem, the world held its breath. They expected a massacre to avenge the blood of the past. But Saladin was a student of the Prophet and a follower of Umar's justice.
He did not draw his sword against the innocent. Instead, he granted amnesty to the city. He allowed the Christians to leave in peace, and he even protected their holy sites with his own guards. The massacre that many feared never happened. Saladin entered the city as a liberator, restoring the crescent and the call to prayer to the sacred sky of Jerusalem. Once again, the holy city had changed hands. But the world would never forget the man who conquered not just the land, but the hearts of his enemies. Jerusalem was free, yet it remained the most desired prize on earth, a city destined to be the center of the world's struggle until the very end of time.
After the victory of Saladin, Jerusalem remained under Muslim rule for over 7 centuries, from the Ayyubids to the Mamluks, and finally, the Ottoman Empire. The city saw a long era of relative peace, where followers of all faiths lived side by side under the shade of Islamic justice. But as the 20th century dawned, the winds of a global conspiracy began to howl. In 1917, while the First World War was still raging, the British government issued the Balfour Declaration, a single letter that promised a land they did not own to a people who did not live there. It was a betrayal signed in ink that would soon be written in blood. Shortly after, the British Empire marched into Jerusalem. The Ottoman crescent was lowered, and the keys to the city were handed to the West. The doors were now forced open.
In Europe, a dark shadow was rising. During the Second World War, the horrific persecution of Jews in Nazi Germany forced thousands to flee. They came to the shores of Palestine as refugees, looking for safety. The Palestinian people, showing the ancient hospitality of their land, opened their doors and gave them shelter. But this kindness was met with a brutal plan of displacement. Backed by the promises of the Balfour Declaration, the very guests who were given shelter began to claim the land as their own. In 1948, the world witnessed the Nakba, the catastrophe. Over 700,000 Palestinians were forced into exile, their villages erased, and a new state was born upon their ruins. The tragedy deepened in 1967 when Jerusalem, the city of the prophets, fell entirely under occupation. The streets that once saw the mercy of Saladin are now filled with concrete walls, checkpoints, and a struggle for survival that has lasted for generations. Today, the fire has spread beyond the borders. This illegal occupying state continues its cycle of violence, taking the lives of thousands of innocent people in Gaza, Lebanon, and Iran, while the rest of the world stands by and watches in silence. What is their ultimate plan? What is it that they truly seek? If you want to dive deeper into these hidden agendas, let me know in the comments, and I will try to bring a detailed video on those subjects. Until then, stay safe. Thank you for watching until the very end.